So in introducing the next speaker, I'll just start with a personal observation. In the previous panel, several of the panelists talked about the value of collaboration and also the amount of time it takes to accomplish the progress we're seeing. And I thought it was worth just acknowledging that in the room today, we have a number of people present who were both responsible for and present at the creation of the collaborative itself. It started actually with a meeting that was hosted by Greg Ryan at DTE in Detroit in the fall of 2011. And Nicholas Bianco is here. He was one of the key staff members, along with Franz and myself, that staffed the collaborative back in the day. And then Steve Frankel was here earlier. He hosted the very first meeting. And so I think a lot of the relationships and trust that evolved over time to make this possible, I want to thank all of you. And there are others that I'm obviously not mentioning, and I don't want to feel left out. Keith Riopel actually hosted the very first conversation that generated the idea for this whole effort in the first place. And I was thinking about that in the same way with Cathy Woollums, our speaker, because a lot of the initial impetus for what is today the Mid-Continent Power Sector Collaborative started with work convened by the Midwestern Governors Association in 2006, 2007. And again, many of the relationships among people in the room started at that time. And Cathy, you were very much a part of that. We were talking last week about that and reminiscing. And so it's appropriate that you're here today, Cathy, at another major juncture in the work. Cathy is a great person to offer keynote remarks at this event because not only her connections to this work in the region, but also in her role as Senior Vice President for Environmental at Berkshire Hathaway Energy and as Chief Environmental Counsel. Because Berkshire Hathaway Energy has I think fair to say, a unique portfolio in the power industry. Cathy has to think about state officials and stakeholders in places as diverse as Iowa, Portland, Oregon, and Wyoming, and all very different places with very different interests and priorities. And it's not just a large geographic area, it's a half dozen companies within the portfolio, all very different. And in addition, Berkshire Hathaway Energy, the larger parent company, involves a lot of the key companies and industries that connect with the power sector in fundamental ways. And so I appreciate your being here, Cathy. We really appreciate your partnership over the years and look forward to your remarks on decarbonization. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. And I was hopeful that he wouldn't go into the area of, you've been around for a long time, you must be getting old. So yeah, we're old friends, but we're not old. Which button? The star? Got it. Okay, I thought it was appropriate to talk, as we're talking about the roadmap, to talk about kind of mapping the future, how Berkshire Hathaway Energy has done that. But as I was sitting here listening this morning, one of the things that I thought about in terms of the collaborative is that it's very much like some of the international climate discussions. I've had an opportunity to participate on behalf of my company in a couple of the conferences of the parties and the intersessional meetings as well. And with Fiji being in the role of the presidency of the COP over the past year or so, they started something called the Talanoa Dialogue. And the interesting part about that is it tried to shift the dynamic in terms of the conversation. And I think the collaborative really kind of embodies that, because what it does, or at least the process, and this is originating from Fiji, is it's a process of inclusive, participatory, and transparent dialogue using stories. So a lot of storytelling, and you heard many of those stories this morning. But it really looks at three components, same three that we're talking about today. Where are we? Where do we want to go? and how do we get there? So when I think about Berkshire Hathaway Energy and where we've been, how we're going to get further, I think it bears a little benefit to just talk about the company. As Brad talked about, we're very diverse. I think we operate in about 26 states and internationally as well. So we've got 3 regulated utility operating companies: Pacific Corp, which operates in the western U.S., serves customers in California, Oregon, Washington, and then Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah. NV Energy, which serves about 90% of the customer load in Nevada. MidAmerican Energy, based in the Midwest, Iowa, a little South Dakota, a little bit of Nebraska on the gas side, and goes into Illinois slightly. And then we've got an unregulated power producing company called BHE Renewables, and I'll get into these in a little bit more detail, but that company was actually formed to enhance other companies' renewable progress. It is a company that it's an independent power producer, and all of its operations are served under PPAs with otherwise regulated utilities, sensing the market need, of course, to expand that renewable network. We also have 2 natural gas pipelines. Those are transmission pipelines. So we don't own the gas, we don't drill for the gas, we just deliver the gas to whoever might be the end user. It might be a utility serving end-use customers, or it could be in an industrial facility. Northern Natural Gas is based in the Midwest, goes basically from Texas up through Minnesota. Kern River Gas Transmission Company takes natural gas from southwest Wyoming, brings it down Nevada, Utah, into California. I think it serves about 8% of the gas load in California. We also have a transmission company in Canada, in Alberta, called, what is the name of the company now? AltaLink. We have operations in the UK called Northern Power Grid, and that's just a distribution-only company because they divested distribution and transmission from generation a number of years ago. We also have operations in the Philippines. So when we think about issues on decarbonization, we have to think very holistically about that. And we think about it in terms of what's going to impact our customers literally around the world. And that is one of the reasons that, again, I've had the privilege to engage in the climate discussions, despite the fact that the US has taken the position as of late that it has relative to withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. I think, maybe I'm just a policy geek, but the conversations are fascinating. And until you sat in the room with those countries who have already been impacted by climate change, you don't have a good sense of reality, honestly. I've had to sit, yes, as old as I am, I've had to sit on the floor in packed rooms to listen to the conversation. It gets painful and uncomfortable in a variety of respects. But nonetheless, important conversations go on. Berkshire Hathaway Energy is the umbrella company. We operate under 6 principles. You see our core principles on the, would be your left side, right side, your right side. Those are principles that we fully intend to ensure that they carry us through for the next 100 years or longer. It's customer service, employee commitment, environmental respect, regulatory integrity, operational excellence, and financial strength. So starting with MidAmerican Energy, I went through the brief overview, but the really notable thing about MidAmerican Energy right now, and as I'll elaborate on further, is over 50% of our retail load in Iowa is served by renewable energy. Currently, there are more than 4,000 megawatts of wind generation on our system. We're in the process of developing what's called Wind 11. We're really ingenious on the nomenclature there. And we have currently pending before the Iowa Utilities Board a request for approval of what's called Wind 12, big surprise. And we'll see if we skipped floors, on a number 13 or something, but we'll talk about the vision to get to 100% renewable and when that might be accomplished. I talked about PacifiCorp. They have a very, very diverse fleet of generating resources. A lot of coal, and as you might imagine, the coal is largely based in Wyoming and Utah. Most of those plants are mine-mouth plants, and as we think about how to decarbonize, one of the really important things we have to consider too is how we're going to decarbonize in a way that doesn't harm those communities where you've got mine-mouth plants and coal plants operating, and that's what your economy is based on. Wyoming is a state with a very small population, and the economic impacts and ripples are pretty darn significant once you start shutting down units. So that also has to be part of the conversation as we move forward relative to just transition of workers, making sure our communities continue to survive in that context. They also have a lot of hydro resources. And we find ourselves in unusual circumstances oftentimes where we're trying to decommission hydroelectric dams. We've been trying to do that for 15 or more years. And just the details associated with trying to accomplish that and trying to satisfy people when you're kind of taking out a non-carbon resource and consider things like irrigators, downstream irrigators and the impacts on them, it gets pretty complicated. In that system, all the resources, whether they're geothermal, whether they're coal-based, natural gas, hydro, wind, those are all operated as system resources. So currently, they're all subscribed to, if you will, or allocated to all 6 states in which customers are served. The complicating factor is that we have some policy decisions made by certain of the states, like Oregon, where Oregon wants to be out of coal by 2030. And that means they will not have coal in rates beginning in 2030. What that means as a consequence is that we've had to accelerate depreciation of their share of coal units. So their customers, or our customers in the state of Oregon, are paying more currently for depreciation of those assets. Then the question becomes, what happens after that? Who takes those coal resources? Because the book value, the depreciation life is much more significant than 2030. So these are all things that we've got to consider in the context of decarbonization. Again, doing it in a way that protects communities, protects customers, so you're not slamming costs on them very quickly. BHE Renewables, I talked about that. They've got projects all over the country, some in Illinois, Minnesota. They did a community solar project. Some of the largest solar projects in the world in California. We've got operations in Texas and New York, but those are all, again, non-regulated facilities. Needless to say, Berkshire Hathaway Energy as an overall organization has long had a commitment to renewable energy, clean energy. As a whole, we've got about 40% of our contracted and generating capacity from non-carbon resources. You can see that we continue to expand those resources as we can, as our policies allow us to continue. 4,400 megawatts at MidAmerican. PacifiCorp has 2,100 megawatts of wind at the end of 2017. and NV Energy just completed the first utility-scale wind project. Their focus has been primarily on solar at very, very attractive costs, but trying to diversify a bit there as well. So MidAmerican Energy, in trying to implement its 100% renewable vision, once we get through the Wind 12 project, assuming that it is approved by our regulators, we will be able to serve 100% of our customer load on an average annual basis with renewable generation. Now, I want to clarify what that means because people get confused somewhat easily. It doesn't mean that we don't have any fossil generation. It doesn't mean that we have all sorts of battery storage and we can tap on that. What that means is the annual production of kilowatt hours from wind will match or exceed the load or demand required from our customers. So sometimes we have excess wind, we put it out onto the grid. Sometimes we don't have excess and we have to utilize either the fossil resources or grid-related resources. The projects have been very positive from a community standpoint. Just Wind 12 alone will result in an extra $6.9 million in property tax payments within the state of Iowa, as well as about $5.6 million in lease payments to the landowners on whose property those facilities are being installed. One of our primary drivers, if you will, is our customer. And really, when it comes down to it, it's all about our customer and making sure that we're meeting their needs and in a responsible fashion. And so that requires us to focus a bit on customer solutions and not do a one-size-fits-all, approach, I guess, to addressing what those needs are. So I'm going to play for you a short video that shows what one of our customer solutions was in our Pacific Core territory in Utah under our Rocky Mountain Power.
To do something that's never been done, you have to think big. That's what Howling's Tomatoes and Rocky Mountain Power did when they tapped into waste heat and carbon dioxide from a power plant to grow tomatoes. Working together, the big idea grew.
Rocky Mountain Power, through its WattSmart program, helped us achieve some of the energy goals that we had when we started this site. We got some $950,000 to help increase our efficiency of electrical use and reduce our consumption. It also saves us some $500,000 in power. They have a power plant now that is actually utilizing its waste to grow tomatoes to feed people in Utah.
This is one big idea that's not only saving money, it's also doing the right thing for future generations.
So when this project first came up, I thought, oh, man, they're crazy. This is never going to work. You know, who's going to be responsible for what piece? And, you know, it's nice to see that we actually found a solution that was positive for the company. That is the power plant that you saw in the background there, that's a natural gas plant. And to be able to come up with a customer solution that saves them money, those are the kind of solutions we're looking for. One of those, and my message here really is sometimes if you add up all the small things, they really amount to something big. And we're hopeful that some of these things really are making a difference. One of the things that MidAmerican has been doing, as well as some of our other organizations, is doing some of the wind repowering projects, where given advancements in some of the turbines, blade sizes, et cetera, we can actually utilize the same footprint, repower those facilities, and get more megawatts or kilowatt hours out of the same footprint. So when we find those opportunities, we want to do those types of projects where we actually get, a 26% increase in generation. Not to focus on the Midwest too much, but looking out west, and I know the earlier panel had some conversation about some of the challenges in the West, and you see it embodied in some of the projects that we're moving forward on the PacifiCorp side. They're adding, through their Energy Vision 2020 project, more than 1,000 megawatts of wind, and doing the repowering of the existing facilities, but we have to build transmission associated with that. We've already got a situation in the state of Wyoming where some of the wind is a little bit stranded because it can't get out of its location based on the transmission system. So despite some of the lower levels at which the coal units are operating, there's still insufficient capacity on the transmission system. And of course, this particular segment, Gateway West, the Gateway project has been underway for many, many years, and unfortunately, I think that's one of the issues that we need to resolve in this bigger context is the amount of time transmission projects take to get permitted and sited. Because we're talking about 10 to 12 years for portions of that project. I'm hopeful that at least some of the recent activities on infrastructure will help expedite the siting and approval process, but we certainly don't want to do that at the expense of the environment. So, some significant challenges to get the transmission projects through, but absolutely necessary to ensure that we move forward with some of the renewable pieces. I want to also emphasize the fact that not all policy approaches are standardized. And in this circumstance, I'm talking about really California and what we've been able to do on the energy imbalance market. Unlike the mid-continent area where we have organized markets and transmission system operators, in the West, you've got, I think it's 26 separate balancing authorities. You don't have a common independent system operator who will match load and demand at the same time. So as California has moved forward with implementing its renewable portfolio standard, what we found, and of course Franz referenced the duck curve and now the gray whale, but the duck curve is actually a real problem in terms of the solar production that occurs in California as a result of the RPS. And so PacifiCorp actually was the first company to start to foster this idea of having an energy imbalance market to take those renewables from California and spread them across the West rather than having to shut those facilities down in periods of overgeneration, to be able to more nimbly, more quickly, using technology, be able to utilize those resources somewhere else. Now, the nice part about that is that it has resulted in the back down of PacifiCorp's coal units. And we are oftentimes operating at loads that we never anticipated being able to operate at, a 30% capacity factor. So, it was always this whole, well, you got to keep them running. Once you step on the gas, you don't let off. That's not the case anymore. And we have seen over an average 5-year period about a reduction of 10+% just as a result of this policy creation of the energy imbalance market. So sometimes you find solutions in strange places, and this is one of them. Of course, in meeting customer needs, we need to make sure that we listen to what people want, when they want it. And of course, I think most everybody has heard of the RE100 organization. It's a coalition of companies that have pledged to go 100% renewable in their electricity supplies. We want to meet those needs. We want to meet them flexibly, cost effectively, and we want to be the supplier. So in certain circumstances, we've entered into power purchase agreements with some of the organizations. In others, we're directly supplying them. And in certain cases, particularly on the MidAmerican energy front, what we've done is rather than, because we only have 105 megawatt RPS, and as you saw, we're already at 4,400 megawatts, we don't have a need for the renewable energy certificates or RECs. We could monetize the value of those, but we believe that our customers have already paid for the benefits of that renewable energy. So we initiated a process with the Iowa Utilities Board to certify how much we produce on an annual basis from renewable energy, and then we retire those RECs on behalf of our customers. So our customers can effectively say, 50% of my electricity was served by renewable resources. So, again, a little bit different policy approach that we believe has served the greater needs of our customers in terms of meeting their sustainability goals. And of course, we all know the reasons why customers want renewables. Most of the organizations are customer-facing organizations, and it's really important for them to compete in the marketplace for the shares of the market that they are targeting. And you can see up there, whether it's they view it as a risk mitigation factor, whether they view it as a product differentiator, it doesn't matter. But fundamentally, they're looking at renewables in a pretty major way. So a couple of things I want to emphasize is the Berkshire Hathaway Energy family of companies takes the long-term view. Again, you look at our core principles, we want to be around for the next 100 years. In order to make sure we're going to be around for the next 100 years, we have to meet the needs of customers in ways that we never anticipated and probably can't anticipate today, but we'll certainly work with our customers to make sure that occurs. We always, as a core principle or vision, want to make sure that we focus on the customers in providing reliable, affordable, safe, and clean energy. Cost is always an issue. And I certainly don't want to leave you with the perception that all these renewable expansion projects have cost lots and lots of money, billions and billions of dollars. However, we have been able to mitigate the rate impacts on our customers. MidAmerican, through most of the expansion of its renewable projects, didn't have a rate case. They did not increase customer rates for 16 years. Then they found themselves in a position where they did go through a rate case, but now even with Win 12, they're not anticipating having to ask for an increase in customer rates until 2027 or later. So, it's tightening the belt, it's making sure we do things efficiently and effectively and have the right policy drivers in place. And I can't underemphasize enough or overemphasize enough the role of policies, because we all think of policies in terms of proactive, establishing RPSs, establishing carbon reduction goals. But there are policies that can be made that actually preclude us from doing things that are beneficial for customers. So I think that's one of my warnings is, don't get in the way, don't let your policies get in the way of advancement of technology and good ideas. And then, of course, we were the first utility to sign on in 2015 of the American Business Act on climate. We are fully fulfilling our commitments under that commitment, and I fully anticipate that we'll exceed those commitments. So with that, I think we have very few minutes. No minutes for questions.